Hi, and welcome back to our Met HD previews from Utah Opera. I'm Carol Anderson, Principal Coach. I'm super excited to talk about tonight's opera because I had a chance to work on a production of this, and it's pretty extraordinary. Some of the best choral music in all of opera, and that's Alexander Borodin's opera epic, Prince Igor. If you watched Boris Godunov a few weeks ago, you'll get some of the same sense. Borodin and Mussorgsky were very connected in Russian music history. Russian nationalism actually began in earnest with the operas of Mikhail Glinka. After he studied in Italy in Vienna, he presented an opera called A Life for the Tsar, 1836, which established him as Russia's preeminent composer. Following in the next generation was a group called the Mighty Handful, or sometimes referred to as the Mighty Five. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, Cesar Cui, Mili Balakirev, Modest Mussorgsky, and Alexander Borodin. All but Balakirev were self-taught musicians. 3 were career military officers, and Borodin was a chemist and a physician. They all lived in St. Petersburg, and they collaborated as a group to advance Russian music from about 1856 through 1870. They used elements of Russian folk music. You'll hear some of that when I play some excerpts. Orientalism, which was whether it was a misguided attempt at representing exotic cultures, it does exist. And in the case of Borodin and Prince Igor, he uses a lot of Orientalism scales and sensibilities to represent the less developed adversaries of the Russians. And they also used specialized scales, the octatonic scale, which is an alternation of whole and half steps. That opera offers a lot of opportunities for some interesting harmonic choices once you've done that. Octatonic just means an 8-note scale, which is many scales, but this one is specific in the whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, and we're about to see. He also they used whole tone scales, which is just whole steps. It's all the kind of music that you hear when someone goes into a dream sequence in an old sitcom. And then there are pentatonic scales, which are across many cultures associated with folk music. You get that's one based on middle C, but if you play just the black notes on the piano, you get that. These are a lot of the same things that were being used by the French Impressionists like Debussy and Ravel as well. Ravel's a little bit later, Debussy is about the same time. So the group of the Mighty Handful began with Cui and Balakirev, and the next 3 joined over the next 6 years. In 1862, when they were all 5 gathered, Rimsky-Korsakov was the youngest at age 18, and Borodin was the eldest at age 28. They were first linked by this name in an 1867 review of a concert by Vladimir Stasov, in which he used the term in Russian Moguchaya Kuchka, which means mighty bunch. His quote from the review was, "God grant that our Slav guests," it was a embassy concert, I think, "may never forget today's concert. God grant that they may forever preserve the memory of how much poetry, feeling, talent, and intelligence are possessed by the small but already mighty handful of Russian musicians." Alexander Borodin was born as the illegitimate son of a married woman who was 25 and then a much older Georgian nobleman. His mother was always referred to as his aunt, and they were actually well provided for by his father. He received a great education using private tutors. He was not allowed to go to traditional school because of his murky background. But he eventually became a chemist and a physician. He played piano and flute as a child and experimented with composition quite early on. I think he wrote something at the age of 9. Notably, he worked very hard to facilitate the education for women in the medical field in Russia, and he did establish a school where women could study medicine until it was later squelched by the Tsar. Borodin began formal composition studies with Balakirev in 1862 and became attached to that Moguchaya Kuchka, mighty handful, though music was always for him a secondary pursuit. Borodin sought a subject for his first opera, and Stasov, the writer of that original article, suggested a medieval Russian epic called The Lay of Igor's Host. And he also provided a scenario for the story. Borodin wrote the text for the opera. Dissatisfaction with the progress of the project led to him taking a little bit of a hiatus before he returned in earnest. One of the big inspirations to bring him back to the project was the success of Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov, which was also about a historical Russian ruler. Upon Borodin's sudden death from a stroke in 1887, Rimsky-Korsakov and Stasov went to his home and collected all of his manuscripts and sketches. And Rimsky-Korsakov and Alexander Glazunov completed the project using what materials they were able to get together. Prince Igor premiered at the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg in November of 1890. And according to Rimsky-Korsakov's memoirs, the opera was a success and attracted ardent admirers, particularly among the younger generation. The first performance in the U.S. was at the Met in 1915 in, strangely enough, an Italian translation. So the opera opens in the Square of Putin in 1185, and this is a city in the Ukraine. I kind of looked it up. It's sort of directly north of one of the points of the Black Sea. I mean, the modern Ukraine, obviously, it wasn't Ukraine back then. The people of Putin are gathered to celebrate the leaders who will be protecting them from the invasion of the barbarian Polovtsians, or sometimes referred to as the Polovetzians. We have a hymn. The opening is actually, the overture, just so you know, is written by Glazunov, for the most part, just pieced together. So it's, I'm going to skip the overture for now, but let's hear a little bit of this is the entrance, probably in whatever case, of the masses to praise Igor, and then a hymn. Listen for the word Slava. I don't expect you to be fluent in Russian. I certainly am not. But whenever you hear the word Slava, that means all hail, and it's a word of praise to your ruler. If you saw Boris, you heard that a lot. You hear these harmonies. That's the harmony for the word Slava, and it sounds very Russian folksy and very nationalistic. I could go on and on. I love that music so much. So I have many sources for music and such. So Prince Igor leads the Russians off to battle, leaving his dissolute brother-in-law, Prince Galitsky, in charge as regent. So in this production, and this is different, let me go a little bit on the side, because of the haphazard nature of the recreation of Borodin's work posthumously, it's a bit of a musicological puzzle. So the production I did actually was in 2001, and it was using an older edition. Then since that time, there's been put together a critical edition, and then even with this particular production at the Met, I did some reading, and they did their own sort of cobbling together as well. So it's a musical. It's like the Tales of Hoffmann. It's a bit of a musicological detective hunt, if you will. So in this particular production, they will now go to the scene in the Polovtsian camp. This is sometimes the third act, or this second act. In this case, it's going to be Act 1. The scene in the Square of Putin is the prologue. So that's just a little bit of an FYI. If you watch another video of a different production, you might, or listen to a recording, you might see things labeled differently. This is in the Polovtsian steppes, 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 the plains. We only actually hear about Prince Igor's troops being defeated through something that has happened off stage. In this production at the Met, the Polovtsian act takes place as if it's a kind of a fever dream of Igor's, where he's wandering after his defeat. Konchakovna, the daughter of the Polovtsian leader Khan Konchak, has fallen in love with Vladimir, Igor's son. Ovlur is a Christian convert living in the Polovtsian camp, and he offers to help Igor escape. Igor is caught between his desire to return home and his honor as a nobleman to bear his captivity very stoically. I want to back up just a hair, though, because I want to make sure we get to hear some of Konchakovna's music. And this is some of that Orientalism that they used so freely to show people of a different culture. So as I say, it's not exactly politically correct, but it is exactly what Borodin does. So you have this, before the aria proper, you have this clarinet. Then it's a very simple harp accompaniment, and then her line gets very elaborate. Little melismas, they're kind of evocative of a more exotic type of music, somewhat like the free call of the muezzin calling the Islamic faithful to prayer. It's that sort of idea. So, oh no, I just lost my lecture. Where'd it go? Oh, this is the problem with using computer things. So as Igor is, he develops this kind of friendly relationship, if you will, with Khan Konchak, and Khan Konchak sets up an entertainment for he's almost a guest at this point. He sets up an entertainment for Prince Igor and such. Sorry, I'm still trying to find where my lecture went. It went away. Excerpts past. Prince Igor. There we go. All right, so the act concludes with this extended entertainment, and you'll all probably have heard at least some of this. This is the very famous Polovtsian dances, which are excerpted sometimes for just an orchestra performance, or you can do them excerpted with chorus, or as this case, they're sort of scattered throughout this act. So I'll play a little bit of the introduction to the beginning of the Polovtsian dance. It says, recognize this tune. And then skipping on. Into a wild dance, which goes on a bit. Yes, that is Stranger in Paradise. What you know is that. Wright and Forrest took the music from Borodin, including some of Prince Igor and some of his string quartet music, and cobbled it together in the musical Kismet. This tune comes back later on top of kind of layered on top of the da da ba da ba da 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 da. I have a memory. This is a fun fact. A memory walk down memory lane for me. When we get back to the chorusing, da 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 da, there's another rhythm happening under it, and the rhythmic pulse was very difficult for the chorus where I did it to hear because there were dancing going on and there were multiple types of. It was just a crazy scene. There were actually these Georgian sword dancers who did all these wild spinning and sparking things. It was kind of crazy. They actually ended up in Cirque du Soleil a couple of years later. But anyway, the chorus couldn't hear the pulse, and they were scattered about, so they couldn't see. So my colleague and I had to stand backstage, and we had to snap the entire time, which is a good 3 or 4 minutes. And so if you've ever snapped a beat steadily through that amount of time, it kind of makes your hands a little sore. This goes along with, like I say, this is a walk down memory lane for me because it was such a great experience, but also goes along with some of the strange things we have to do to help facilitate the success of an operatic production. So then we go back to Putivl, where Yaroslavna, she's the princess, mourns her husband's absence while Galitsky is living his best life. He's dissolute, he's drinking, he's making sure all of the people left at court are fully lubricated, if you will, so that they will be quite fond of him and he's buying their loyalty with drink, as you will. And there is a scene where the ladies come in to complain to Yaroslavna that Galitsky and his men are harassing them. And it's has a little bit of a sense of folk-like music. This is the first melody. And then Yaroslavna tries to find out more information, what's going on, and it's very noble because she's a noble lady. And then the choristers, the lady choruses, they do a very talky chorus in 5/4, very fast. Da, 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 da. That's all in Russian. So if you can imagine a non-native speaker trying to get that, it might have been a little fast, but that's a lot of Russian to spit out very quickly. So I look forward to hearing that. So Galitsky's supporters are, as Galitsky's supporters are trying to decide whether they're going to rise up and take over, the boyars, which is just the word for the nobles of court, enter with news of the Russian army's defeat at the hands of the Polovtsians, and that Igor has been captured. We already know this because we just saw that in the act before. Fires spring up in the distance as enemy forces are threatening the safety of Putivl. So the final act, after all this, Igor returns, and it sounds to me like they've made a real point of stressing almost the PTSD shell shock of Prince Igor after this defeat and horrible thing. He joins Yaroslavna for a very joyful reunion, but I think it's going to be probably less joyful than we might imagine. And then they made a really interesting choice. The opera typically concludes with this hymn of praise for Igor's return, and everyone's happy that he's back with Yaroslavna. But in this production, the team decided to add in music from another piece. This is from a project that the Mighty Five did, or the Mighty Handful did, called Mlada. It was a little bit of a collaboration. Mussorgsky did an act, Borodin did a chunk, and they were all just kind of working through this. It actually never really came to fruition, but some of the music exists in little chunks and pieces. So they decided, the production team decided to add in an episode from Mlada of Borodin, where it's describing the tumultuous upheaval of the river Don, which is to the east of Putivl, and how it flooded and overflowed its banks. Legend has it that the overflowing of the river Don meant that the Polovtsians were prevented from coming into Putivl, and it kind of was part of the saving of that. And the New York Times described it this way. It says, Mr. Abrazadov, I can't say that name properly, this is our Igor, looks stunned to see his people cheering him. Then, the River Don floods, an orchestral scene that Borodin wrote for another dramatic work, is inserted. It is said that the River Don hindered the Polovtsian offensive, blah, blah, blah. During its turbulent opening episode, Igor stomps among his people looking unhinged. And the turbulent opening episode, I've just only got an orchestral score, but it sounds, we get this kind of figuration where it's like, it's Allegro Furioso. That was really, it's a little bit of that octatonic stuff too. That's very, those three things together don't match. Those, and then we have some crazy chromatics, which I'm not very good at reading all, but it kind of goes like this. And it's supposed to be the river swelling up. And then as the music turns pensive, which is a little bit later on in the 5-minute excerpt, Igor calms down and he starts to pick up things that can be salvaged from the rubble. And the idea is that one by one, the people of Putivl are going to be able to rebuild. It's going to be a tricky, long process, but they begin the process. So I think that's a really interesting way to end that, and I look forward to seeing that. I didn't see it in the theater, so I'm going to make sure to watch and see how this all comes off. So I hope that was interesting for you. It was really great to revisit this piece. And I can't wait to hear the amazing Metropolitan Opera chorus under the direction of my friend Donald Palumbo. He's so brilliant and wonderful. So it should be a real treat. As always, I'm appreciative of the time you take to join me. Thank you for supporting Utah Opera, or if you're not in Utah, opera wherever you may be. We're grateful to Judy Brady and Drew Browning, who are facilitating the presentation of these little introductions. And until I see you next, and of course, until we see you in our theaters, stay safe and keep washing those hands. Thank you.